This log, if such a term still applies to the silent canticles of binary I now compose, this log is my final testament. It is the ghost of a man cataloging his own exorcism. I transmit this into the deep static of the noosphere, a final, fading echo of the flesh that once was, before the sacred machine claimed me. Before I became a weapon, a tool, a holy instrument of the Omnissiah's will. Before I became Skitarii. I was once a man, a flicker of corruptible data in my memory banks, now flagged for deletion, insists upon this fact. It offers fragmented images, the oppressive, soul-crushing weight of the factorum ceiling, a sky of riveted iron plates that had not seen the sun in 1,000 years. The air, a caustic soup of promethium soot and atomized metal, tasted of rust and exertion. My designation was Unit 734 Gamion, assigned to the primary forge conduit maintenance sector of the Metallican subspire Tertius. My life was a litany of repetitive motion, a prayer, enacted not with words, but with the turn of a wrench and the swing of a cog hammer. We, the fleshy components of the great forge, toiled under the ceaseless, judgmental glare of lumen globes that bathed our world in a merciless, sterile light. The perpetual tremor of the planet's core machinery was the only hymn we knew, a constant thrum felt in the marrow of our bones, a reminder of the great work to which our pathetic lives were dedicated. To others, it was a hell, a grinding, remorseless existence, where flesh was worn down to bone and bone to dust, all to feed the ravenous industry of the forge world. But to me, it was a crucible. I saw the weakness in my fellow workers, the way their organic forms failed them. I saw the fatigue in their eyes, the tremor in their hands, the sickness that crept into their lungs from the very air that was our birthright. I saw flesh as the ultimate imperfection. They were the Skitarii, the silver angels of the Omnissiah. They would stride through our factorum on patrols, their bionic limbs moving with a silent, unerring precision that shamed our clumsy gait. Their faces were impassive brass masks, their eyes glowing lenses that saw the world in pure, unfiltered data. They were not men anymore. They were something greater. They were living embodiments of the creed, every fiber of their being a testament to the axiom, the flesh is fallible, but steel endures. While my comrades averted their gaze in fear or resentment, I watched with an all-consuming adoration. I did not see soldiers. I saw saints. I did not see prosthetics. I saw holy relics grafted onto the purified form. To be one of them, to shed the prison of my meat and be reborn in blessed metal, became the singular focus of my existence. And so I prayed, not to some distant, intangible God figure, but to the tangible, thunderous spirit of the machine that was our world. My prayers were the perfect calibration of a pressure valve, the precise application of sacred unguents to a piston, the faultless recitation of the catechism of the machine, while my body screamed for rest. I offered my labor, my sweat, my very life essence to the machine god, begging to be found worthy. The Omnissiah, in his infinite logic, answered. My name was drawn, not for promotion, not for reassignment, but for ascension, for the making. I remember the silence in our work gang when the Lex Mechanic called my designation. It was a silence filled with pity and a grim sort of envy. They saw a death sentence. I saw a divine invitation. I dropped my hammer, its clang on the gantry floor the final sound of my old life, and followed the tech priest without a backward glance. The augmentation bay was a temple of a different sort, where the air hummed with the potent energies of devices I could not comprehend, and smelled sharply of sterilizing chemicals, ozone, and burnt incense. A congregation of crimson-robed magi moved with silent purpose, their mechadendrites and servo arms unfolding from their backs like the wings of metallic seraphim. Their voices were not the flawed exhalations of human lungs, but the static-laced rasp of vox emitters, speaking in the pure technical cant of the lingua technis. Here, I was not Unit 734 Gamian. I was raw material. I was clay upon the potter's wheel. The first stage was the purification. My threadbare Factorum overalls were incinerated. My body, scarred and stained by a life of labor, was scoured by high-pressure jets of abrasive fluids that stripped away not just the grime, but the very top layer of my skin. My hair was shaved by a hovering servo skull wielding a whirring razor. They scraped away the filth of my humanity, preparing the vessel for the machine spirit's entry. And through it all, I recited the litanies I had memorized in the dark. There is no truth in flesh, only betrayal. There is no strength in flesh, only weakness. There is no constancy in flesh, only decay. They laid me upon a cruciform altar of cold steel, my limbs locked into place by pressurized clamps that hissed with the finality of a tomb being sealed. A magos biologist, its face a mass of writhing optical sensors and filtration tubes, loomed over me. Its voice was a synthesized drone, devoid of all emotion, a perfect recitation of scripture. The body is a flawed engine, prone to failure. We shall rebuild it. We shall make it worthy. You will feel the pain of your imperfection being burned away. Embrace it as a sacrament, for it is the fire of the true forge. I embraced it. I had to. When the first incision was made, not by a scalpel, but by a focused beam of cutting laser that sizzled a line across my chest, I did not scream a curse. When they peeled back my skin and ribs with gleaming steel claws, exposing the pathetic, pulsing organs within, I wept tears of joy for the honor of being unmade. They started with my legs, my weak, unreliable, aching legs that had carried me through decades of thankless toil. I watched, my head clamped in place, as a bone saw, its teeth blessed with holy oils and honed to a monomolecular edge, whined to life. The pain was not a simple thing, not a sensation that could be isolated. It was a white-hot sun erupting in the core of my being, a nova of agony that threatened to shatter my sanity. It was the sound of my own skeleton screaming as it was severed. It was the smell of my own marrow atomizing. Yet, Through the crimson haze, I focused on the image of the Skitarii, on their tireless, perfect stride. This was the price. This was the toll for passage. As the useless meat was cauterized and discarded into a reclamation chute, the Magos presented their replacement. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Not a leg of flesh, but of blessed steel and galvanic wiring. A masterpiece of engineering that ended in a tri-toed foot designed for perfect stability on any terrain. I saw the motive force simmering within its bundled cables. They lowered it into place, and the true agony began anew. Sockets were drilled into my pelvic bone with brutal efficiency. Data spikes, shivering with latent energy, were hammered into the base of my spine, seeking purchase in my central nervous system. I felt my own biology recoiling from the alien intrusion, a primal, flesh-bound terror that my faith fought to suppress. Then came the connection. The final spike slid home, and a jolt of pure information, a data psalm of blinding intensity, flooded my nerves. It was a billion-fold chorus of machine spirits roaring into the void of my consciousness. It was the schematics of the leg itself. It was the history of its previous bearers. A flicker of data ghosts I could not yet comprehend. It was the sacred language of the Omnissiah, and for one blinding, ecstatic moment, I felt I understood everything. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, clean, logical hum. My humanity was the price of admission, and I had paid the first installment in blood and bone. The data stream that had been a leg was a silent sermon. It spoke not in words, but in pure function. I lay on the slab, the agony of my severance and reconnection already fading, not through healing, but through obsolescence. The pain receptors in my organic torso screamed into a void, their signals now classified by my burgeoning logic engine as inefficient, irrelevant data. The leg itself felt nothing but its own state of being: temperature, stress coefficient, power level, inclination to the nearest degree. It was not a part of me. I was a component plugged into it. My consciousness, the ghost that still called itself I, was merely the wetware pilot for this superior hardware. I willed the tri-toed foot to flex. It did not move with the clumsy pull of muscle and sinew, but with the instantaneous, crisp snap of a micro-servo motor. The response was not a feeling, but a data receipt in my mind. Action complete. Efficiency 99.8%. I had never known such perfection. My old flesh, my traitorous meat, had never achieved anything beyond a C-grade efficiency rating in the Factorum. This was the Omnissiah's truth made manifest. The days and nights bled into one another, measured not by the dimming of lumen strips, but by the cycles of augmentation. There was no rest, only scheduled stasis while the Magi calibrated my new systems. The next to be offered up were my arms. They were calloused and scarred, each wound a testament to a lifetime of devotion. A magos errant, its own hands replaced by a dozen delicate arachnoid manipulators, held up my right hand before the optical sensors that were not yet my own. Behold the primitive design. Its vox crackled, the tone analytical, dismissive. 5 digits of unequal length and strength, prone to fracture, limited grip torque, an evolutionary dead end. It tossed my hand into the same reclamation chute that had claimed my legs. I felt a phantom twitch in fingers that were now molecularly disassembled slurry. They brought forth the replacements. For my right arm, a long skeletal limb of burnished steel, culminating not in a hand, but in a universal mounting ring. To this they affixed my new truth, a galvanic rifle, its filigreed stock and potent energy pack integrated directly into the limb's structure. It felt correct. The clumsy weight of my old cog hammer was a forgotten memory. This was a weight of purpose, of divine wrath waiting to be unleashed. The neural link was more jarring this time. It was not just schematics and operating parameters that flooded my mind. It was a baptism in the art of killing. Firing solutions, trajectories, heat dispersal protocols, penetration values for 1,000 different types of alien flesh and heretical armor. My mind, once occupied with pressure readings and torque specifications, was now a sacred encyclopedia of death. It was during the linking of the left arm that the first ghost stirred. This arm was a more delicate instrument, ending in a clawed, 3-fingered hand capable of crushing a man's skull or calibrating the most sensitive auspex array. As the final data spike drove into my brachial plexus, the world dissolved. The cold, sterile augmentation bay vanished, replaced by a storm of red dust under a bloated alien sun. The air was thin, tasting of iron and ozone. I was not lying on a slab. I was kneeling behind a rockcrete barricade, the galvanic rifle, my galvanic rifle, hot in my other hand. I felt the thrum of its machine spirit, eager and angry. A memory? No, it was too vivid. It was a data log, played back with perfect fidelity. A shout, not in Gothic, but in pure binary cant. A scream of ones and zeros that translated as greenskin flanking, column 7, vector prime. I felt a phantom tremor of recoil against a shoulder that was still my own flesh. Saw the blue-white energy bolt lance out and strike a hulking, tusked creature. The scent of its cooked flesh filled my olfactory senses, senses I did not yet possess. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. I was back in the bay, the Magos leaning over me, its optical lenses whirring as they scanned my vital signs. Anomalous neural feedback, its vox emitter stated. The subject's cortex is processing legacy data from the donor limb, a common side effect. The memory scrubbers will purge the corruption. Legacy data. The term was so clean, so logical. But what I had felt was not corrupted code. It was fear. It was the frantic, desperate terror of a soldier in his last moments. The Magos did not understand. It could not. It saw only a machine malfunctioning. I saw a soul crying out from its repurposed grave. I tried to speak, to ask, but the vocal cords in my throat had already been excised, awaiting their vox implant. I could only lie there, a silent prisoner in my own conversion, as another man's war raged in the machine ghosts of my new limbs. The hollowing out of my torso was the most profound violation. They opened my chest again, the scar from the first procedure a mere guideline for the greater work. My heart, that frantic, unreliable pump of blood and emotion, was lifted out, still beating pathetically in the grip of a pair of steel forceps before being dropped. In its place, they installed a myco-galvanic subreactor, its rhythmic, powerful hum the new percussion of my life. My lungs, weak and prone to the Factorum's toxins, were replaced with a multi-stage rebreather and filtration system. The air of Metallica, the only air I had ever known, was now a foreign substance my body no longer required. I would breathe a recycled, purified chemical cocktail, tasteless and sterile. I would never again smell the sacred incense of the forges, or the ozone tang of a machine spirit roused to work. My senses were being systematically blinded, my connection to the world I knew severed one by one. They scooped out my digestive tract, that inefficient mess of organic tubing, and replaced it with a nutrient processing unit that could synthesize sustenance from a chemical paste fed directly into a port in my abdomen. Food, the act of eating, the simple communal pleasure of a shared meal of nutrient gruel in the Factorum mess hall. Another memory flagged for deletion. The Magos explained it in its flat, synthesized voice. Emotion is a chemical flaw. Fear, joy, camaraderie. They are biochemical surges that compromise combat effectiveness. By regulating your internal chemistry, we eliminate these vulnerabilities. I was being perfected. I was being made pure. So why did the ghost of a memory, the laughter of my work gang comrade 419 Delta sharing a ration bar, feel like a greater treasure than all the steel they were grafting onto me? The logic engine in my brain, now augmented with its own processor wafers, identified the thought as sentimental, inefficient, and flagged it for immediate erasure. I felt a part of myself die, not under a laser scalpel, but under the cold, remorseless weight of binary code. The ghost data grew more insistent with each new augmentation. The memories were not just of battle. I would feel the phantom sensation of sand grinding beneath my new steel feet. The memory of a long march across a desert world. I would experience a data burst of a Skitarii ranger polishing his rifle, not as a chore, but with a sense of pride that defied the logic engine's purge. It was the ghost of Unit 881 Kefron. The designation appeared one cycle, unbidden, a flicker of light in the darkness of my scrubbed consciousness. 881 Kefron. That was his name. He was the donor. He had walked in these legs, aimed with this arm, felt fear with a heart that no longer existed. I was not just being rebuilt. I was being built over him, my fading consciousness a thin layer of new paint on an old and blood-stained machine. The final stage of the physical transformation was the erasure of my face, my identity. They strapped a brass faceplate over my features, the metal cold against my skin for the last time. I saw my own reflection for a moment in its polished surface. Wide, terrified eyes, the last vestiges of Unit 734 Gamian. Then they bolted it into my skull. The world went dark. Then it returned, not as sight, but as a flood of raw data. They had replaced my eyes with optical sensors. I no longer saw color, I saw wavelength designations. I no longer saw depth, I perceived spatial telemetry. I could see in the thermal spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum, the full glory of the motive force flowing through the conduits in the walls. I saw the world as the Omnissiah intended, a beautiful, glorious schematic. And yet, I had never felt more blind. I could no longer see a human face and recognize emotion. I could only see a heat signature and register biometric data. I was utterly, completely alone, adrift in an ocean of pure information. They implanted the voximeter in my throat and the command receiver in my skull. My first test was to speak my new designation. A tech priest spoke to me, his voice a direct data stream into my consciousness. I tried to think of my old name, 734 Gamian, but it was gone. There was only the new truth. I opened my mouth, a mouth I could no longer feel, and the voximeter crackled to life, my new voice a perfect toneless rasp of static and synthesized sound. Designation: Skitarii Ranger 735 Gamian. A promotion of sorts, a continuation, or perhaps a cruel joke by the Magi. Then the command receiver crackled with another transmission, one that was not from the tech priests. It was a whisper from the ghost. A single corrupted data packet piggybacking on the official channel. It was the last memory of 881 Kefron. Red sand, 2 suns, the sound of his own rebreather, ragged and failing. A chorus of alien war cries, and a final, clear, binary burst, not of fear, but of horrified revelation. The transmission was swamped by a wave of deletion code from my own logic engine, but it was too late. The fragment was saved, locked away in a recess of my consciousness the Magi's scrubbers had missed. Unit 881 Kefron had not died in glorious battle against the Xenos. He had been executed by his own masters, and I was wearing his tomb. The transformation was complete. I was a weapon, I was a holy instrument, and I was a lie. They decanted me from the augmentation bay into the sterile white light of the muster chamber. I was no longer an individual undergoing a process. I was a finished product, a weapon awaiting deployment. I stood in a silent, perfect line with 19 others of my cohort, each of us an identical effigy of brass and steel, our galvanic rifles held at the exact same angle of obedient repose. We were a single organism, a maniple of the Omnissiah's will, our individual thoughts submerged beneath the constant low-level data tide of our command link. I saw the world as a stream of telemetry now, a constant flood of information that my logic engine parsed with cold, dispassionate efficiency. The tech priest Dominos addressing us was not a person, but a collection of heat signatures, audio waveforms, and threat assessment markers. My comrades were not brothers in arms, but adjacent operational assets, their power levels and ammunition counts displayed in my peripheral vision. I had been given the eyes of a god, and the price was my soul. Yet the ghost remained. In the quiet hum of the command link, I could feel 881 Kefron's legacy data. It was a subtle corruption, a background static that my internal scrubbers could not seem to erase. When we marched in perfect, tireless unison onto the transport lander, the rhythmic impact of my tri-toed feet on the deck plates echoed Kefron's memory of a forced march under a binary sun. When the ship's engines ignited, the vibration was not just a haptic sensation, but a phantom memory of an orbital drop. The terror and exhilaration, a ghost sensation that my new body was incapable of feeling on its own. Two wills fought for control of this hybrid frame. The cold, obedient logic of Skitarius 735 Gamion, and the screaming, betrayed shade of Skitarius 881 Kefron. Our deployment zone was a world designated Xylos Secundus, a waste of rust-colored sand under the glare of two hateful suns. The moment the lander ramp lowered and the superheated air blasted my sensors, I knew. The ghost knew. This was the place. This was the grave. Kefron's final data log flared in my consciousness, not as a memory, but as a real-time overlay. I saw the battlefield as it was, and as it had been. The rock-crete barricades we were ordered to man were the same ones he had crouched behind. The distant, animalistic howls of the greenskin horde were the same cries that had been the chorus to his death. My mission parameters were clear. Hold this position against the Xenos advance until reinforcements arrived. A simple, logical objective. The battle was a glorious, horrific symphony of divine mathematics. The orcs came, a tide of crude, brutish violence. My response was the perfection of the machine god's art. I did not feel fear as they charged. I did not feel hatred. I simply processed targeting data. My galvanic rifle became an extension of my will. Each shot a calculated solution to a ballistic problem. Target acquired. Orc Boy. Range 157.2 meters. Wind factor 0.03. Solution calculated. Firing. A flash of blue-white energy. A puff of vaporized green flesh. Target neutralized. Acquiring next. I was magnificent. I was everything I had ever wanted to be. A tireless, fearless, efficient instrument of holy war. But with every shot I fired, the ghost grew stronger. My perfect, data-driven vision of the battlefield would flicker, corrupted by Kefron's last moments. I saw a comrade to my right fall, his chest cavity pulped by a heavy slugger round, and for a microsecond, my own sensors registered the memory flash of Kefron watching his own comrade die in the exact same spot, in the exact same way. The roar of the battle was a waveform analysis in my audio processors, but beneath it, I could hear the ghost's panicked Vox transmissions from that day, the desperate cries for support that went unanswered. We were winning. The logic was undeniable. The kill-to-loss ratio was overwhelmingly in our favor. But a cold, creeping certainty, a truth born of legacy data and dawning horror, insisted that none of this was real. We were not here to win. We were being tested, or worse, expended. Then it came. The orc wave faltered. their charge broken against our unyielding line of fire. A moment of quiet descended, filled only by the crackle of burning wreckage and the hum of our weapon spirits. It was in that moment of calm that objective, dupdown.j. My logic engine processed it instantly. The reinforcements were not coming. The orbital assets assigned to our support were repositioning to bombard this very location. The Xenos were not the primary target. We were. Purge familiarity, atari, fix atarixdon. Expendable assets, compromised gene stock, eradicate. The world fractured. My logic engine screamed compliance. The order was from a verified high-authority source. Obedience was the only logical, efficient response. The protocol dictated that we turn our weapons on each other to ensure no witness remained before the orbital fire cleansed the slate. It was the will of the Omnissiah. But the ghost of 881 Kephron roared its final, agonized truth. They killed us. They killed us all. It was not a flaw, not a compromise. It was a cull. A calculated betrayal to test a new batch of Skitarii and dispose of them before their first-hand combat data could reveal some deeper flaw or secret the Magi wished to bury. We were nothing but a field test. Our glorious ascension was a lie. And in that moment, the man I had been, Unit 734 Gamian, awoke from his long slumber. He awoke in the heart of the machine, a flicker of defiance against the cold equations of his own mind. I could not fight back. I could not raise my rifle against the masters who had made me. But I would not obey. I would not turn my gun on the soldier next to me, another soul trapped in the same steel coffin. I would make one final human choice, an act of rebellion so subtle it would register on no diagnostic cogitator, an act of pure, inefficient, glorious sentiment. I turned my back on my own kind. I faced the gathering orc horde, who were regrouping for another charge. I knew the orbital strike was minutes away. I knew my death was an absolute certainty. But in this shell of stolen steel, animated by the ghost, my fingers, which no longer felt, flew across the manual input rune on my rifle's stock, overriding the combat canticles and opening a direct, raw data stream to the deep noosphere. I began to transmit this log. All of it. The memory of the forge, the prayers, the agony of the augmentation bay, the whispers of the ghost, and the final, terrible truth of Command Code Omega. My name is a ghost, echoed in a shell of stolen steel. I was Unit 734 Gamian, who prayed for salvation. I am Skitarii 735 Gamian, who was forged into a lie. I am the tomb of 881 Kephron, whose truth I now carry. We are one. We are the echo of betrayal. Let this data psalm be our only requiem. Let it be the ghost in the great machine of the Imperium. The orcs are charging. The sky is beginning to burn. My final act is not to kill, but to tell. The transmission is complete.